And we are live on Facebook. My name is Erica Merrill, and I am the founder of Perfect Legal Video. And it's Friday afternoon, so we are in luck. We have attorney Joseph Nivin. He is here to talk to us today about what I always thought might be a fairy tale, uncontested divorces. And good afternoon to you, Joe. Is this a myth or are these a thing of reality?
It's a thing of reality. I do them.
Oh my God. All right. Well, what's the percentage of uncontested versus contested?
That I see, it's probably about 2/3 contested, 1/3 uncontested. But I'm sure that a lot of it is because a lot of people do uncontested divorces on their own without an attorney.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, let's go back a little bit and let's define what is an uncontested divorce.
An uncontested divorce means that the parties are getting divorced and that they do not need the judge to make any decisions for them. Those decisions regarding custody, child support, maintenance, equitable distribution, which is splitting up the assets and liabilities, and counsel fees. If the people have an agreement on all of those issues, then that's an uncontested divorce.
Oh, okay. And so, yeah, I know a few people that did their own divorces, and they, I usually say this to them, but they're very sorry that they did that
Right.
later on in life because they didn't know what the heck they were doing. So, do you need to go to court for an uncontested divorce?
Nope, you do not need to see the inside of a courtroom. People do need to file the papers in the clerk's office, which is usually located in the courthouse. But other than that, you don't need to see a judge or anything if it's uncontested.
Oh, wow, really? Okay. So you still have to visit to file, but then that's it. You don't have to go
Right.
in. You don't have to stand up in front of people, nothing.
That's correct.
Okay. How do they know they're doing it right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah. Well, that's typically why people will consult with an attorney. So I have had people walk into my office having started the process of doing the uncontested divorce on their own, and then they realize they need the help of an attorney. So often people will go to an attorney to draft the packet that needs to be drafted, to get advice about whether it's a good idea to execute the agreement that's been contemplated. But people do often get in trouble when they just get the packet that's given to them by the clerk's office and fill it out on their own and just try to file it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm sure that number one, they probably don't understand everything that's going on in it, and number two, it's easy to get confused when it's not something that you do every day, and it's going to affect the rest of your life. I guess what is the process, and what are the common mistakes?
Yeah. Well, the process is that there's a packet that's available at the clerk's office, and people can just fill it out and file it. Otherwise, what an attorney would do, or at least what I would do, is first I file what's called the summons with notice, which is the paper that starts the divorce process. I get it served on the other side. If it's uncontested, then I'll usually reach out to the other person or their attorney if they have one and say, hey, how do you want to get it? And I'll get them to sign something acknowledging that they were served. And then I fill out the packet. It's a lot longer if there are children, because then you need to do the child support worksheet. If there are no children, it's very simple. And then I file it. And at that point, if the court wants us to make any changes, we will make them. But typically, when an attorney does it, it's not sent back, even though I've heard horror stories. But for the most part, all that we do at that point is wait for the judge to sign it. We wait for it to be entered by the county clerk, meaning become a public record. And then at that point, the parties are officially divorced. And the only issue is getting the judgment of divorce into the parties' hands. But some of the common mistakes, well, one way that it's often rejected is if there's no provision for child support. The courts usually don't like to see that. If the child support is some wild number, like I've heard of cases where somebody agrees to give $2,500 a month but says they only make $20,000 a year, Um, and otherwise, it can be relatively simple things like filing it without an index number, meaning a number that's given to the case by the court, leaving out certain paperwork that's required, like leaving out a sworn statement of barriers to remarriage if the parties were married in a religious ceremony. Those are some common mistakes that I've heard of.
Wow. I mean, that sounds pretty scary. If I wanted to have an uncontested divorce, what would I do to make that happen?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is there needs to be an agreement with the other side about the issues that people typically fight over in divorce, like custody, child support, equitable distribution, maintenance, and counsel fees. What people will often do if they can't just come to an agreement with the other person privately is they'll get a mediator. And if the mediation is successful, then the divorce is uncontested because the mediator helped the parties to reach an agreement about all those issues.
Okay. So mediation is always a nice way to expedite that process. It sounds like if there are, some of the big rocks that people need to move to get those uncontested divorces processed.
Right.
I mean, I guess, what if one side wants uncontested and one side doesn't? I mean, you must see that all the time. I guess then it's just a contested divorce then, right? Or
yes, I do see that all the time. What that often means is that there's one side that is really ready to move on, another side that's not, and unfortunately then we'll have to do a contested divorce. What I'll usually do is that if I have the client that really just wants to move on and the other side is causing problems, then I'll say all that we can really hope for is that the other side gets a good lawyer that I can work with, because a good lawyer will often convince his or her client to accept a reasonable settlement offer. What I also do tell people is that unfortunately, if your priority is to get it done as quickly and as cheaply as possible, you will probably have to compromise in ways that you don't want to compromise. So what that often requires is that we make a settlement offer that is better than what the other side will probably get at trial. That's really the only motivation the other side will have to agree to move the case.
wow. And you know what they're going to get at trial for the most part, right? I mean,
yeah, I know that everybody hates lawyers for using this phrase, but it depends. If it's a custody case and it's very heated, then we often don't know where they'll be by the time the case gets to trial. Because custody cases are very, very fluid. And very often the way that they're determined is what happens between the time that you go to court and the time they get to trial in the most heated circumstances. With respect to everything else, it's usually not as fluid. When it comes to child support and maintenance, of course, there are always the questions of what if one person's income changes dramatically from the time that you file until the time that you get to trial. When it comes to equitable distribution, the real wild card is if there are assets that are very much subject to change, like if we have stocks that will increase dramatically in value, then in some circumstances they can be valued at the time of trial, not at the time of commencement. But the most malleable aspect of divorces are typically custody.
wow. Okay. And when you see some of those changes, let's say somebody's income, I mean, do a lot of people try to change their income just during the divorce and during the divorce proceedings?
Well, to do that on purpose, you'd have to be very stupid. You do see people say in fits of anger, well, I'll just quit my job so this way she doesn't get anything from me. And that's a very, very stupid thing to do, because the court can still do what's called impute income, meaning issue an order based on earning capacity rather than based upon your reported income. And of course, if you've already quit your job and you ordered to pay child support and maintenance as if you still had your old job, then that's not a pretty picture. What's more typical, and this is a very unfortunate thing, but it's reality, is that when people are going through this, they're usually not as capable as they would be otherwise. So I have certainly seen some cases where there have been self-employed people where you see their incomes go down. Of course, the other side thinks, well, he's doing this on purpose because he doesn't want to give me anything. And, I'm sure there are some cases where it's true, but what's very often the case is just that somebody's not as capable of being as good of a businessman or businesswoman when they're going through that kind of stress. Or I did once see a case, it was very sad, where the guy was kept away from his kids and he ended up getting fired. And I asked him what happened, and he said, well, I got to be honest with you that I really wasn't producing because, I was missing my kids too much to really produce for my boss. And, you got to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people realize how much it feels like you're working through quicksand when you're going through something so traumatic.
Right.
Until you go through it, you probably don't realize. I know it's not the same for everyone, but I feel like most of the people I've talked to, that is the general feeling of people that are going through a divorce. And hopefully and luckily for most people it passes. But yeah, I can absolutely see there are days where people don't feel like getting out of bed, and until you go through something like that, you don't believe it. But yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I have represented people who do what I do, and I've definitely, having talked to people that have my profession that are going through this, I've really been able to empathize, because, these are people that spend all day telling people you really can't be reducing your income when you're going through divorce, and then it's really a reality check that it's much easier said than done.
Yeah, now all of a sudden they're in their client's shoes and they get it. They
Right.
get what it's like. They're used to fighting for those people, and now they know, what it's like. So that's actually an interesting perspective, and it's actually really telling that even divorce attorneys need divorce attorneys.
Yes.
When they're going through a divorce. And if you think you're going to do this on your own, just remember that.
Just Google what happens. You can find on Google what happens to people that do it on their own, because the tabloids love crazy stories about divorce lawyers going through their own divorces.
Oh, do they?
Yes.
Do you have any that you can tell us? Anything interesting?
There was one that was all over the newspapers. This guy tried to represent himself in his own divorce, and he himself was a divorce attorney, and he ended up getting fined by the judge for his conduct in his own divorce.
Yeah, I can see that. They they probably get too passionate about it, and they don't shut up, and then they get kicked out of the courtroom.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it was that he did. There was another one about an attorney who was not a divorce attorney, but he actually ended up getting disbarred for his conduct in his own divorce. He basically terrorized the judge and his court staff, and he ended up getting disbarred for his conduct during his own divorce.
Oh my God, he got disbarred?
Yes.
Oh, that is a bad situation. So that he lost his whole career.
Yes.
For thinking he could do it himself.
Yes.
I'm sure a brain surgeon wouldn't perform it on themselves either. So
yes,
it's complicated, and what I like about you and what you've really shown us over the past few months is that, you really have to take, it's not that it's not emotional and that you can't be empathetic with people's emotion, because obviously that's what we're talking about here. But it's about remaining calm and looking at this like you're dissolving a business. And it's easier said than done, and the people involved in the divorce usually can't do it, and that's why they need somebody that's level-headed like yourself that can calmly walk them through this difficult process.
Yes, what I tell people is that you need to see it from the point of view of the judge. And it's pretty much impossible for someone going through it to see it from that perspective, but that's why people have us, because what we're able to do is to step back and say, how is the judge going to see this? And this is a judge who doesn't know the parties from a hole in the wall, who for whom the case is just one case on his or her calendar, it's pretty much impossible for people that are going through it to have that perspective.
Wow. Yeah, no, I can absolutely see that. I mean, you can't see the forest for the trees when you're involved in it. And, that's just a cliche, but it's totally true. Do you have any other advice or stories for us before we go this afternoon?
Not really, just if you're going through an uncontested divorce, it's best to have an attorney to do it, even though it will, cost a little bit, and you might think that you can do it for free, that it will save you a lot of time in the long run if you have an attorney to do it instead of doing it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And especially when children are involved and, everything else, it can still be uncontested. It can be fair. But when you are not a lawyer yourself, and even when you are a lawyer, as we've just discussed, it can be just one of those things where you shoot yourself in the foot for the rest of your life. You've got to kind of handle what you did wrong, because somebody else who's level-headed and involved in fighting in the courts every single day and not involved in your marriage is going to be the best person to help you get the best results from this, even when it's uncontested. And I'm sure, you said that people have come in the middle of trying to do it themselves.
Yes.
I mean, is it then that they find out that, wait a minute, this isn't as fair as I thought it was going to be, or we didn't consider these aspects? So what typically happens?
Typically when people come in, when they're already in the middle of it, it'll just be that the judge keeps on rejecting their papers, and they're wondering why. Other times, I remember I did have one where it was the husband that came in, but what it seemed like was that the wife wanted what she wanted it then, and they had already submitted the papers, but she just kept on screwing things up because it wasn't moving fast enough for her. I don't think that he ended up retaining me, but I was able to give him some advice about what to do in order to make it less chaotic.
You've mentioned that a couple of times about it not going fast enough for one of the parties.
Right.
I'm sure there's some strategic reasons for that. What are the I know, right? It's just, I always find something you say catches my interest, and I find it fascinating. What typically is the reason for somebody wanting to rush a divorce, besides having someone else they want to marry, which I hear happens sometimes? I think that's nuts, but that's my own personal opinion.
Well, in the uncontested divorces, one major issue, which is legitimate, is that there are no temporary orders of child support that are issued while it's going on. So I do know there's one attorney that will often complain to whoever is willing to listen about how the length of time that the court takes to review and sign the uncontested divorces can delay people from getting child support, which is why it's often a good idea to handle the child support in family court, and then when you do your uncontested divorce, the only issue in child support is going to be that the order from the family court is going to continue. Because in family court you get a temporary order pretty quickly. Otherwise, it's just that it could be that they already have a girlfriend or boyfriend. Sometimes all that is that they've been separated forever and never bother getting the divorce, and all of a sudden one of them is engaged and wants to get married. It could be immigration issues, where they're applying to just their status, and their soon-to-be ex-spouse is refusing to sponsor them, and they keep getting asked, well, why isn't your spouse sponsoring you? and they can't wait to walk into the divorce judgment and say, "Here, I'm not married anymore." Um, or it could just be that they're sick of being tied to the other party. That's it.
Hmm, interesting. Well, yeah, you know what? And sometimes people have to put on hold buying new properties and starting new aspects of their lives, like new businesses and that sort of thing, I suppose. I mean, do you see that a little bit?
Um, Less so, but I really don't think, given how long it takes usually to close, that that would really be an issue. I mean, there's really no harm in starting to look while you're going through the process, as long as it's uncontested, so you pretty much know the time frame. But at the same time, I mean, if you put in an offer and you're in contract, then I could see the seller being a little bit impatient.
Yeah. Well, those are all, little interesting side notes that we've gone over right as we were going to end this interview. I really appreciate your patience in that, and I know everybody really loves this interview, and they find the stuff we talk about very helpful. So I just would love everybody to know that if you are in the New York City area and you need an attorney to help you with an uncontested or a contested divorce or any other family court matter, child support, alimony, um, even situations with abuse, all sorts of things. If you're adopting, I mean, I'm listing a lot of them. What did I miss anything? There's probably a couple I missed.
No, I think they got everything.
All right. Well, wow. I'm really memorized. I've really memorized. I'm like a walking billboard for Joe's company. Uh, anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this lovely Friday afternoon. I hope everyone has a happy new year and a great weekend. And Attorney Joseph Nivin, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and sharing with us information on uncontested divorces and what we need to do if that's something that we have as a goal in our family court.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
See you next week.
Okay, bye now.